Hello, everybody, and welcome back to this week's episode of the BeDifferential Podcast. I'm your host, Ava Gregory, and this week I'm really eager to introduce our guest because she is the experienced designer currently with Rivian. Welcome to the episode, Dalal Elsheikh.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Absolutely. I'm very much looking forward to hearing your story and some of the scope of your work. The space that you're in is just super fascinating to me. So why don't you give the listener just high level a little bit about yourself before we really get into it?
Yeah, sure. So I'm an experience designer. I call myself an experience designer because I work between the digital and the physical space on vehicles. I'm currently with Rivian as a product designer, which means that I'm doing a ton of your in-vehicle screen displays, but my team is the vehicle and devices team, which means that we're working in the cars, but we're also working on the exterior of the cars, things like the headlights. We're also working on the adventure products, so your camp kitchen, your flashlight, your overlanding and off-roading accessories, things like that. So I'm really happy to be able to work in between the digital and the physical hardware. My background originally is industrial design, so that's why I'm really passionate about actual physical products that come to market. And then I got my master's degree in transportation systems at Art Center College of Design, which is a huge school over in Los Angeles, mainly for transportation design. But yeah, I've always been an automotive enthusiast my whole life. Love driving. I have a little Toyota MR2 manual transmission. I've just been a car person my whole life.
I love that. So how did you end up getting involved in working in the industry?
Yeah. So I tell people that I got into my line of work in the most boring way, which is that I simply went to school for it. I chose to go to Art Center because I knew it was a school with a big network, especially in automotive. And when I graduated, Art Center does this thing called the grad show, which is where they invite a bunch of professionals to come and view students who are graduating this work. And normally, in a normal circumstance, you're in the Pasadena Convention Center and you're building like your whole booth and you're really making a show out of it. But I graduated in one where there was a little pandemic that kept us all at home. So we couldn't do any of that. So I ended up graduating over Zoom, which was actually pretty great because I was not trying to do like carpentry for my final. But through that is when I really got in touch with a lot of professionals in industry. One of the hardest things, and I say this to everyone who's trying to break into this field, is just getting your foot into the door, getting that recruiter to look at your resume. What's nice about doing something like a grad show is it kind of cuts out the middleman where you're speaking directly to those hiring managers, to those lead designers. And they saw my work. I was reached out to by a few different companies and in the end ended up going to Ford and moving to the Midwest and living in Detroit for about 2 years. Yeah, and then after that, went to Mercedes-Benz and now Rivian. So I've kind of done three major automotive companies now.
Yeah, absolutely. And your background spans across more than just automotive. I mean, you mentioned the industrial background as well, but you even worked on some projects related to footwear. Can you talk
Yeah,
about maybe how some of these projects that you've done, what connects all these disciplines for you, and how are you really taking each of your lessons or experiences from each of those roles and applying them to the next?
yeah. My two favorite products are sneakers and cars. And growing up, those were my favorite things to draw. And I think the through line between those two things, especially in sketching, is they have fast lines, right? The way that you sketch a car and the way that you sketch a sneaker kind of has a lot of the same visual form language, a lot of the same design language. You're making these really like sexy shapes that feel aerodynamic, but they don't necessarily have to be all that aerodynamic because realistically, you're not really running that fast or ever driving that fast. But those to me were the things that felt the most exciting when I was actually in the practice of designing a product and making a product. So when I got to school and got the opportunity to do a study away at Penn Sol, which is Dwayne Edwards's design school. Now he's moved it actually to Detroit and it's become part of the HBCU, Penn Sol Lewis College of Design. But he used to be the chief designer over at the Nike Jordan.
Wow.
So getting to do this 2 week intensive where we were just like militantly in the studio designing sneakers, and I was working on an Under Armour project at the time. Like that was the first time that I'd ever gotten to do something that was just such a quick turnaround and I mean, truly in a design intensive where you're pumping out like hundreds of sketches
That's
every day.
insane.
Yeah, it was pretty incredible. And that was also my first time doing anything truly in footwear. So I didn't know how in footwear you take a sketch to, a model or a prototype. So I had to learn all of that. We were doing like anatomy studies on like the human foot and watching sports. And like I remember Dwayne says this thing that's really funny where he goes, I watch sports from the knee down. All I'm watching is how these athletes are moving their feet all the time. I was like, that is such a like a brainworm. That's such an intense way to like view the world, but that's how you
Yeah.
know that he's incredibly passionate about what he does. Yeah, his story is very cool.
That is fascinating. And honestly, this is just making me think like footwear to automotive. It's not, I mean, Michelin does crossover all the time, right? They create soles out of recycled rubber and all these.
Yeah.
So this is really cool kind of pathway. So as you're working with brands like Mercedes-Benz now, Ford, what have been some really defining moments that you think have shaped ways that you're looking at innovation and ultimately the experience for the overall user?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think my main takeaway from now working at these three very different companies is that everyone is trying their best, I think, to keep up with the tech industry. Silicon Valley can move at a pace that just automotive cannot,
Mm,
especially a legacy automotive like a Mercedes-Benz or like the Ford Motor Company. As much as we, when I was there at the time, wanted to keep up with all of the new technology. We wanted to work on AR. We wanted to work on autonomous driving. We wanted to free people from having to physically operate the vehicle, especially if they couldn't. But the problem with that is it's such a bureaucratic system in the way that
yeah.
these companies are laid out. And also just you cannot produce a car the same way that you can produce an iPhone or make software. So things are just going to take time. That's just the nature of it. And we are always held to wherever the government or the economy is at that time. So as much, for example, when I was at Ford, I worked on the AV LLC, which is the autonomous vehicle wing of D Ford, our satellite studio essentially. And one year we just went, okay, we're not doing autonomous vehicles anymore. And it
Wow.
was kind of a time around 2022, 2023, where it felt like the entire industry had kind of stopped working on autonomous vehicles. There was a big push at one point where everyone was thinking about level 5 or a level 3, which is a little bit in between, where the user also has some control. There just came a year where it felt like nobody wanted to do this anymore. I'm assuming because of government difficulty, because it's not just about making the car self-drive. We can do that. It's really about making sure that the infrastructure can also communicate with the vehicle, that the cities are also, in agreement to help us bring these products to the road. Like, I don't know if you've ever taken a Waymo.
I haven't, but I do know what they are, and they honestly
Okay.
scare me.
No, they're so fun. I love them. They're great. I live in San Francisco. They're everywhere now, but even in LA, they're also everywhere. The problem with Waymo is they don't take freeways.
Mm,
So if you want to go somewhere that would have been 10 minutes away with the freeway, it might now be 30 minutes away on a Waymo.
wow.
I don't necessarily know why that is, if they feel like they're just not ready to take freeways or if they're having some kind of, infrastructural issue maybe
Sure.
with city planning. I'm not sure what that is, but I think eventually when Waymos actually get onto the freeway, that is going to be a really big game changer for car sharing, car
That's
hailing.
yeah, that's really interesting. So coming from that perspective that you just mentioned, where there was just a point where everyone was like, maybe we're not going to do this. How do you
Yeah.
balance that? I mean, for navigating, okay, next steps to hitting a total halt and pause on current projects. I mean, what did that look like?
Yeah, it's definitely a little bit of whiplash, but it
Yeah.
happens a lot. It happens a lot. And I think they're very aspirational and there's a ton of things that they want to do. I mean, there are projects that are happening in these car companies right now that you would be so excited to hear about that are just locked away in a vault.
Mm,
And they're either too expensive, too wild, or the company strategically doesn't believe in them. Maybe they're worried that people aren't going to buy it. They have very thin margins, to be honest, so it's hard to
Yeah.
be a risk taker in
Yeah.
automotive unless you have a billionaire backer like Elon Musk who can afford to make something that maybe isn't as successful as you thought it would be. But what's also funny about that is, like, now that I've been in 3 studios, I've watched how a lot of the time we're all kind of designing the same thing. We all know what, an exciting and idealistic world could look like if we could just spend infinite amounts of money and design power on these vehicles. But unfortunately, that's just not the case. Also, I'm rambling and I forgot the question.
No, honestly, I appreciate that because that tangent I love. No, I was just gonna ask, when you're faced with this like halt, and when they said,
Yeah,
you're in the middle of a project and then all of a sudden
right,
you have to shift and pivot, what does that look like?
right. That's a great question. That looks like, I mean, every time there's like a week of just disappointment, of course, there's always like, okay, I was working really hard on this thing. I'm so excited for it. And it always comes like right before you're about to present it to a major stakeholder or something. And they go, actually, we're pulling it. Actually, you're not going to see it this year. So that's always really disappointing. But like I mentioned,
Yeah.
we're always sitting on like a wealth of projects and ideas
Mm,
that are just at the seed phase that haven't really flourished yet. So there's always a pool of,
gotcha.
opportunities.
Like next project.
Yeah, it's really about being resilient and being
I was
okay.
just I was just about to say this sounds like it is really training some resilience.
Yeah, I at Mercedes they used to joke that, yeah, we design these projects for the bin. We design them to go to the trash,
That
but
is
that's
so
not true.
sad. That's
Everything
so
gets
painful.
archived, of course. Yeah, like if you're familiar with the Vision 111 concept that came out of Mercedes, it's like this really
I'm not
beautiful
actually.
orange. I'm pretty sure it's not autonomous. I'm sure it could have been, but it's like this really beautiful race car. It's designed after the C1. That was a project that my team got to work on actually the year before I joined the team. I was very jealous when I got there. But what I heard was that project was actually shelved for maybe 4 years.
Wow.
So they had it,
Wow.
then they canceled it, and then they brought it back. And
Let
it
me
was a
ask
big
you this then,
success.
Dalal, and maybe you're not at liberty to say this, maybe you are, I don't know, but how far out are you looking from curation and design to this seed idea you're mentioning? You have a plethora of these seedlings. How far out are you realistically working on a project and then potentially seeing it come to fruition?
Yeah, that's a great question. Ford and Benz, I've always been in advanced studios, and in the advanced
Okay,
studios, you're not really working on direct production vehicles. So
got
I'm
it.
not
Yeah.
working on your next S class that's coming out in like 2030 or
You're like
whatever.
concept focused.
We're concept focused, and we're working on things that could be 10, 15, 20 years out. Now at Rivian, everything is production focused. So I'm working
Hmm.
on things that are like 4 months out, which is really
Wow.
crazy to me.
Yeah. What is that
Yeah,
change of pace like for you going from that long, like potentially seeing it come to fruition to now
yeah,
almost immediate?
yeah. I'll say I was so I had a really big ego when I joined the team. I was like, this is gonna be so easy. Are you kidding me? Production design, everything's already laid out for you. They have a design language. They have so much structure. I'm just gonna pull things together, pump it out. It's gonna be great. I was sorely mistaken. It is an added level of pressure when you know that a customer is going to have this in their hands very soon and you're going to get almost immediate feedback because people are not shy about posting on Reddit when they don't like something. They're not shy. And I am on the r/Rivian Reddit. So if you're complaining, I know. I'm watching. I
She's
read
taking
it.
it
Don't
personally, you
worry.
guys.
We wrote it down. We're trying.
No. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I imagine that's a lot to navigate and balance for sure. So I do want to ask too though, as someone that's focused, I mean, or has been in your career on more of this kind of like futuristic perspective, what we're looking toward, what trends do you see shaping the future of mobility in automotive?
Oh, that's a really good question. So, because I work on in-vehicle screen and stuff, infotainment systems, people have a lot of opinions on
Mm,
buttons versus no buttons.
okay.
Do you not have it? People are like, oh, too many screens. We have too many screens.
I mean, okay, I
Give
can
me
see some
physical
validity in
buttons.
this. Like
Yeah,
I am a very analog person, so like it is hard for me to like get behind, but I also respect that there is like a time and a place. You know what I mean? Like
yeah.
it's like I did not realize this is such a hot
No,
topic.
this This is a really big deal. I've gotten eaten up in the Motor Trend comments over this. This is a big deal to people, which I understand. Listen, my car is 35, 36 years old. You think it has a screen? It doesn't. I
Right.
love an
Right.
analog experience, okay? But I also don't think that completely getting rid of screens is the answer. I think there's like a happy medium in there. I totally understand people's complaints when they have a full touchscreen display in their car and then they get as soon as you learn the system, you get an over-the-air update and now all the buttons are in different places. Trust me, I know. I've had that happen before. But I do think there needs to be an equal balance. And I also think that we need to think of things that are maybe outside of that. Like people are also a little bit technophobic to the idea of like bringing AI into the car and like
Mm.
using a voice interaction. And I know voice interaction right now, it's not good. It's it's not good. It's actually very annoying. I've sat in some cars where you'll just be talking to your friend while you're driving and then your voice agent pops up because it thinks that you called it and now the music has paused and your navigation's doing something funny. But I promise when we start perfecting it and we make it feel a little bit more intuitive, a little bit more human, a little bit more agentive, so you're not just
Mhm.
asking it to do something, but it can almost assume exactly what you need from it. I think we'll be in a really good place when we can start doing that.
That's honestly insane that it's feasible to be thinking about that and the
Yeah.
anticipation. I think that's wild. Along these lines, a little bit, I did listen to your Motor Trend feature that you did, and you discussed planning driving experiences for 2035 and kind of maybe what that'll look like. What do you think will define how we engage with our cars a decade from now? And I think you just mentioned something a second ago too that was like everyone has an opinion, so you're having to appeal to everyone, and not everyone wants the same things in a vehicle. So how do you think we'll engage with cars? And then, from a design perspective, how are you factoring that in?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really hard one because you can't make everybody happy, which I
Right.
think is okay. I think it's in an ideal world, we have a market full of multiple options. For example, Rivian is an adventure product electric vehicle, and now Scout is also an electric vehicle adventure product. So it's nice that now consumers will have two options to choose from. If maybe Rivian isn't your thing, but you like the Scout truck over the R1T, I think that's the ideal scenario. We want more competitors in this market so that one, it keeps us sharp. We won't rest on our laurels knowing that we're the only one, but also it gives users more flexibility and you don't kind of feel pigeonholed. You have to pick one product. So you can't really design for everyone. But also I think it's a Ford quote where he says if you asked customers what they wanted, they would have told you they wanted a faster horse, right?
Mm.
But then he
Mhm.
designed the car. So sometimes I think also we as people, because I'm also a consumer, we don't necessarily know what we want. It's kind of nice to be given this new option that maybe you wouldn't have thought of.
Yeah.
So
Do you think we'll ever reach a point where there's this option paralysis of choices in front of you? I think that, there's already a lot of choices, right? Just across, I mean, of course, you can break it down and look at it differently and categorize, but really, when we're looking at the type of projects that you're working on or have worked on, do you think that we'll reach that point where there's too many options that are too similar, especially since you maybe just
mm,
made the statement, like we're kind of working toward the same thing and on the same type of stuff?
yeah, I do think that sometimes we do find ourselves in a place where like a lot of cars kind of look and operate in the same
Mhm.
way.
Mhm.
But I'm hoping that option paralysis won't be the case so long as we think about maybe new ownership models. Like, not you,
Mm.
we don't live in a world where you have to own a car. You could lease a
True.
car,
Yeah.
um, turn it in after a few years, and then you get to try something else. I think I think some people just really have almost like a brand loyalty that they want to stick
Mhm.
to a certain kind of car. BMW owners are probably not going to get a Benz and vice versa. But yeah, I think if we think about just different ways of ownership and maybe car sharing, that won't be the case. I think that was also something that a lot of brands have tried in the past, like creating these leasing or car sharing models, especially for newer generations. We were always talking about how like the youth aren't necessarily as excited about cars as maybe older generations were. So we could see that very much changing. People could have a new car or a different car every week. We don't know.
That's such a good point. So while we're talking so much about the future, I do want to ask, what has been one of your favorite projects that you've worked on?
Yeah. One of my favorite projects, and I'm really happy that I get to speak on it because in advanced studios, when things don't come out, you can't put it in your portfolio, you can't tell anyone about it. But Mercedes-Benz, we did an AR project, like with these AR glasses in the vehicle where a rider could sit in the car and now you no longer have to look at your screen. Everything is kind of laid out in front of you. You can
Wow,
drive and speak to your My Mercedes agent. You can see your points of interest as you're moving, like laid out in the world. I think that was really my favorite project because I got
that's
to actually
insane.
wear a bunch of different types of like AR and VR glasses and be in the car. We got the Apple Vision Pro like as soon as it came out. Didn't drive with it, promise. Cops if you're watching. But like that's just to be in such an immersive experience while
Yeah.
you're also driving, obviously, and like it's a delicate balance of like what's distracting and what's not. I think that was probably my favorite thing because that was also just a new mental model of how to design for something. We're no longer in screen. That was
100%.
yeah,
Yeah, like
that was my
literally
favorite.
interactive during. I mean, that's like Iron Man, like in real life. You know
Yeah,
what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah,
That's really cool.
exactly. Just like moving things around. Yeah.
No, that's fascinating. That's really, really cool. So I want to shift a little bit because this podcast, we obviously talk about broader automotive, but we do have a focus on motorsports, and I understand you're an enthusiast as well. And so I would love to talk about your thoughts on autonomous racing. I think there's a lot of really strong opinions on both sides of if it's like its validity and if it's worthwhile. And I'm just curious if you have any just general thoughts on autonomous
Yeah.
racing.
Yeah. I think I know a lot of people think that, oh, now we've taken the driver out, it's a less human experience, but I think it's taking maybe just the focus away from the driver, him or herself, and then now placing it onto the engineers. It is really a
Hmm.
group effort to engineer a vehicle that's going to be that precise and drive on tracks that are so challenging, like to take these blind corners and do that all with cameras and radars and sensors. I mean, I think that's like incredible. Like that's a feat of engineering. I also think sometimes people think of it as like a binary one or the other. Now we're going to get
Mm,
rid of all race car drivers. No, it's nice to have options and choices. We're going to have
that's so
multiple
true.
different things. If you don't want to watch, sometimes F1 can be like a little bit emotional and dramatic, and you get drivers who are like fighting with each other. If you want the racing without that, maybe autonomous racing is for you.
That's a great perspective. I have heard a lot of the opinions of like, okay, we're taking the driver out of it, so we're not going to have the same emotion, but now putting it and shifting the focus to the engineers, it's
Yeah,
so valid. Like that's an
yeah.
awesome perspective. And I want to know too, Dalal, what's your series? Like as an enthusiast, you mentioned that you always grew up like loving cars and
Yeah.
vibing with them. Like what is your preference to either drive or watch? Like what are you into?
I really love Formula One, but I
Okay.
have to be honest, I stopped keeping up with it as soon as Max Verstappen started winning. I was like, I can't do this emotionally.
See, here's the thing, and I completely get it because it starts feeling redundant. It starts feeling like okay, same old. But like
But
that,
okay, but that's not even fair because when Lewis Hamilton was winning, I was like, I love it. Another one.
do it again. No, that's fair. That's fair. But I do. I think that I've heard some of that feedback where it's like when you just see it over and over, like, but that's how the grades happen. You know what I mean? Like you
Yeah.
just have to sit through like the 8 years, the 10 years of them
Yeah.
just doing the same thing. But
Yeah.
oh gosh. Okay, love that. So then I do want to ask too, and you kind of alluded to this a second ago, but do you ever think that like AI driven or whatever like artificial driven racing will ever fully replace traditional motorsports? I think it's maybe naive to think that that would happen, but I'm just curious on your thoughts because it is kind of a balance and it is something as we go more and more toward the future and more autonomous activation is happening and execution across any industry, maybe it is. Like, what are your thoughts there?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so because we still have horseback racing, So
Okay,
why
true.
would it? There's room at the table for everybody. We're just gonna
That's
build a
true.
bigger table, guys. It's okay.
Okay, wait, I love this. And this is just going to turn into a little segue because, Jalal, you have done some amazing work for committing on growth and diversity in STEM projects. Your own career has been a testament to this, and it is all about, and hopefully this podcast speaks as well, that we're all about having more seats at the table rather than closing the door. Can you speak to some of the, like, just projects that you've worked on from STEM integration to how you think your background has influenced your work and your career now?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I'm Sudanese American. My parents are both Sudanese, like immigrated to this country in the late 80s, early 90s. Both math people, like both got their master's degrees in math, really instilled in us from a young age that we had to achieve, obviously, like get good grades, go to a good school, get a good job. Like there was no room for me to not do that growing up. Like it was just
Heard.
not an option.
Yeah.
But coming from a community where everyone looks like me, I did not realize, I think, until as the older I got is when I realized the older I got, the fewer people who looked like me were around me,
Yeah. Yeah.
unfortunately. Because I'm like, okay, I spent the beginning of my life in Sudan where everyone looks like me. And then I grew up in North Plainfield, New Jersey, where it was majority like Black and Hispanic students from from elementary to high school. So I'm like, okay, a lot of people look like me. And then I go to college and I'm like, okay, fewer people in this design program. And then I go to grad school and then I start work and I'm like, oh, nobody looks like me. So
Yeah.
it was really like an awakening to see that happen. And I'm always so surprised when I get reached out to, especially by people who've like seen the Hot Wheels show and they're like, "Oh, my daughter really loves you. My kid really loves watching the show. Thank you so much." That I'm always so taken aback by.
With recent emphasis on social media, right?
I
This is
got an
so precious.
email. I got an email the other day where a dad reached out to me and he said that his 7-year-old son was doing his Black History Month project on me. Girl, I cried. The way I cried with snot, like I was not okay that day. I was not okay. And then he sent me photos that his teacher took, and I'm up there with Serena Williams and Misty Copeland. I was like, whoa,
Yeah.
hold on. But I never really thought about it. But yeah, if you're a young Black kid and you're looking for someone who looks like you and you love cars, especially if you're a young girl, that's really hard to find, especially someone who's visible, because they're out there. There are Black women
Yes.
in automotive, there are Black men in
Yes.
automotive, but they're few and far between. They're hard to find. They're not as celebrated as they should be. I remember when I was looking for schools to go to, when I found Art Center, I worked backwards. I looked up famous automotive designers and tried to figure out where they went to school. I didn't realize until later on that like none of those people were Black.
Mhm.
One of them was Black.
Mhm.
So really, really few and far between. And I think that happens from a very young age where if you're like me and you grew up in a family where everyone expected you to become a pharmacist or a doctor or an engineer, and then you go to design school, you
How
fight
dare
to
you?
go to design school. I think a lot of people with backgrounds like that, it's just hard to convince the older generation that maybe design or art is necessary. But I'm glad I did that so that I got to be that for
Yeah.
these young.
Yeah, and it's such an important conversation. I grew up where I was actually in a predominantly Black and Hispanic community as well, and then later in high school shifted to predominantly white, and I experienced culture shock because I had seen the inverse. And as I got older and as I went to college and worked and then being in motorsport, it is a very predominantly white space, and I think that it's absolutely necessary to elevate and showcase and say like you can see yourself here too.
Yeah.
People exist that want to help support your community, and no matter what you look like or your background at all. And yeah, I never want to avoid that conversation because I do think some people get touchy about it, and it's absolutely necessary, especially for us to see the industries that we love continue to grow. We have to expand that diversity. and
Yeah.
and let's talk about it, because you just mentioned your Hot Wheels. I want to dive all into that. Tell us about your experience with being a presenter on the Hot Wheels Ultimate Challenge, and kind of how that experience shaped, I mean, one, your visibility, but also now how we can expose technology to a wider audience.
Yeah. That show is an incredible project to get to be a part of. Rutledge Wood, our host, is just a gem of a person. Uh, Gertrude Eugene Jr. is maybe the coolest person in automotive. So to be among those two was a very humbling experience. But I think that's kind of been the story of my life, where I get to be the least interesting and least smart person in the room, which I love. I love that. No, I love that. I'm like, I don't know how I snuck my way into this. But so the premise of the show was, we have two contestants. It's a competition show, and they would come to us with this car from their past that was really significant to them growing up, or maybe a family member had it, or maybe it was like their first car, and we would source that exact car for them, bring it back, and they would redesign it and reimagine it as a Hot Wheel. So we were thinking like insane, larger than life, just something that really performs, really like shows excitement. So that was beautiful. And they were actually they were wrenching. Like, it wasn't fake. Like, they were actually in those shops working alongside their carpoolers, where they're mechanics. And it went from like the original car, you'd come in the next day and they like had chopped the roof off. Like, they were in there.
Wow.
So that was a big project and a ton of fun. Long hours, but like no one was complaining.
What was the turnaround time? Like, what was the duration from start to finish?
So we filmed for 9 weeks to do 10 episodes, 9 weeks. I think we were doing like 2 at a time. And I think we finished, I don't remember what we finished, I think in April, and then it came on TV at the end of May.
That's awesome.
Like they
That's
were
a quick turnaround. Like,
yeah,
honestly.
they were nonstop. But honestly, from the day I got the phone call to do the show and like getting on the flight, it was like 4 weeks. So that was quick. Yeah.
And what was the car that you guys ended up doing?
We did quite a few cars.
Okay. I thought it was like one per episode or something like that.
No, so each episode it was 2 contestants, 2 cars, until we got to the finale, which was 2 episodes, and the finale had 3 contestants, 3 cars.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
That is so cool. I'm gonna have to go back and watch that, because I saw clips from it, but I did not watch the whole thing. So I definitely need to do that. But that's awesome. So, okay, as someone who's had all of your work experience now and an enthusiast, I'm gonna ask, if you could debunk a myth about autonomous design or driving or anything, what is something that you would love to just confront and debunk?
Okay, that's a great question. I think number one is that the idea that autonomous cars are going to take over, that we're trying to take away.
They are scary.
We're trying to take away your enthusiast car. You can keep your EcoBoost Mustang, I promise. You can keep it. I don't want it, so you should have it. I think that's quite a crazy one. I understand the fear that like, oh, I want the control over the vehicle. I can't let something else drive for me. That one I get. Listen, I have nothing to debunk for you. I take Waymos all the time. I think they're great, but you never know. So I understand being a little bit nervous about that. But hopefully in a perfect world, these cars are communicating together. So they're not all like working individually. So you don't have to worry about, some major catastrophe happening. The trolley problem. Are you familiar with that?
I am.
Okay, that's like an insane theoretical. Never bring that one up to me ever.
Well, you brought it up.
I know, but that's like the meme that you see all the time. It's like, well, what's gonna happen if there's like a grandma tied to the tracks and 12 other people? Like, what are you gonna do? Listen, I don't know. Just it's okay. You can take an Uber. I promise. I'm not forcing you. But yeah, I think that's maybe the biggest myth, that like we're gonna take your fun cars away. That's not the plan.
I think that's fair. I think honestly, like my biggest, like I've seen iRobot, okay, like autonomous anything just scares me a little bit, okay? Like I have such a deep appreciation for the work that goes in behind it, but it is a little scary if I really overthink it. Like I can have some self-induced anxiety from it. But really, Dalal, as your experience and having followed your path, nobody's path is going to look different or look the same, right? What is a way or piece of advice that you would recommend for someone getting interested in getting more involved in the professional space for either experience design, something related to autonomous, automotive projects? What is your kind of piece of advice for how to get more integrated into it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think if you're interested in design, whether it's like product design or exterior, interior design, that's really about just practicing your work and putting together a portfolio. If you're someone who's not already in the field, putting together a portfolio and like applying to these jobs or reaching out to people, I always say reach out to the person who has the job that you want and just ask
Mm,
them some questions, ask them what it's like doing what they do, or how they got there. People are busy, so I know like not everyone replies, and I'm guilty of that too. It's hard to get to all of my LinkedIn messages, but practicing, do your 10,000 hours, put together that portfolio, apply, whether or not you think that you're qualified, do it anyway. For like to come to it from an engineering or maybe like a strategy perspective, that I'm probably not qualified to speak on. But in advanced studios and like startups and stuff, I think sometimes they are more open to people who don't have a background in automotive. I know that can
hmm
be also another hard thing. Like if I don't have experience in the thing, how are they going to trust that I can do the work? But I
Yeah.
think startups and advanced studios tend to be a little bit more open because they
Yeah.
want a difference of ideas.
Sure, sure. And I think to your point as well, not being like one of the big three, they have more flexibility and can adapt a little
Yeah.
quicker. So I think that's a good point. You mentioned at the beginning of the episode, some of the challenges and biggest things to overcome is just getting your foot in the door. How would you recommend people just get their foot in the door? I mean, networking, we always highly emphasize on this podcast
hmm
and how important it is. But, from your initial experiences to getting involved, can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. It is truly networking. It is reaching out to people. It is going to these conferences.
Yeah.
There is Concept House is a German, I think they are an agency, but they do an automotive design conference every year. Well, every other year in the US. I think it's
Okay.
new. And then those opposite years, they do it in Germany. But like that's one that seems to be strictly automotive design.
Hmm.
And they're still kind of new, so they haven't like fully got the word out yet. So I went last year because some of my friends were on panels, but there was not that many people. So like that was a perfect opportunity if someone wanted to get their foot in the door in automotive
Yeah.
design to like literally go talk to the chief of design at Toyota, California. I think
That's
he's right
insane.
there. Go to my managers from Mercedes were there. Like that would have been a perfect opportunity to literally go talk to the exterior design manager at Mercedes Benz. So like put yourself in these positions. People are pretty open to talking to you.
Okay, perfect. To any listeners, use this as a takeaway. Okay, that is
Yeah,
a great opportunity.
and Concept House is not paying me. They're not paying
Not
me, by the
sponsored,
way.
like not. No, really. I appreciate you bringing that up. That is an awesome, awesome event to be able to have someone get their foot in the door. I really
And there's,
appreciate that.
there's more. I think there's like some in Detroit that are also design focused. So if you're not in California, that's also a great place to go.
Perfect. And Joel, just as we're closing out here, is there any kind of closing remarks you have, or otherwise, where can the followers find you and follow along on your journey and your career?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I mean, this has been so much fun speaking to you. You can find me on Instagram at Delshk. That's DELSHK.
We will have you. We'll have it all below so people can find you with ease. But
Perfect.
thank you so much for giving some insight, sharing a
Of
little bit
course.
about your opinions and perspectives working in this space. And listeners, thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next week. Bye.